We're live.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the first of Gods and Game Masters Presents panel, where we are going to talk about the tropes, problems, downfalls, and possible workarounds for evil races in tabletop role playing and fantasy and possibly sci-fi in general, but mostly tabletop role playing because that's our focus. The very first thing is I, of course, am Jack Kellum, Jack Gogsbane on Twitter, of Gods and Game Masters. If you search it, you'll find me. I promise nobody else has stolen my name yet.
Lucky you.
But I have an amazing group of guests and academics, creatives, and performers here today, each to give their own perspectives on this often hot button and controversial topic. I'm going to start with my tech man and producer and creative director for the other streaming work that I'm on, which is The Lion Knight.
Hi there.
Give us a rundown.
I'm Lion. I am the creative director and founder for Tales from the Table Studios. We do a bunch of different actual plays and are working on some really awesome content. We also have a really exciting announcement coming up next week. I'll talk more about it later. It's fine. That's not what we're here for. I have been playing TTRPGs for 20 plus years because I'm old. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for that from both sides of this conversation. But I am also someone who was raised Jewish in a Jewish culture with a lot of Jewish heritage and have used that in a lot of the lore and stories that I've written and told throughout the years. You can find me at the Lion Knight 42 over on Twitter or at TFTT Studios on Twitter or Tales from the Table Studios on any other social media where we do a bunch of stuff. And that's me.
Very good. All right. I would definitely like to welcome to the channel Abby. Give us a little rundown of what you got going on.
Yeah, I'm Abby. I am Danae of the Near the Water Clan. I am an award-winning TTRPG performer, sensitivity consultant, and hopefully one day credited author in a TTRPG sourcebook. We'll see. But we're here to talk about a lot more important stuff, and I am so thrilled to be on this channel and talking with these amazing, brilliant folks.
All right. Stefan.
Obviously, Abby was talking about everyone else when she said brilliant. It's just not me. No, I am Stefan. I am Umbral Knight _X on Twitter. I've been in the playing and running TTRPGs since 1977. I also wrote my history master's thesis, the third of 3 master's theses on race and gender in early tabletop role-playing games. And I am just kind of identify where I'm coming from. I am of predominantly African heritage, but because of the nature of something that may come up in this conversation, of diasporic cultures, and particularly African American cultures, I am also one third of my genetic diversity, I will say, comes from the Iberian Peninsula. And then also I have a smattering of blood from other parts of Europe. And so that may come up as we talk about races and diasporic cultures and things like that. So that's where I'll be coming at this from.
Excellent. Q.
Hi, that's me. I'm Q. I sometimes go by Dorian Black. You can find me on Twitter at midnight_Inc. That's INQ. Q like my name. I'm sure you get it. I am a TTRPG performer. I am also a part of the production team for Tales from the Table Studios. I am playing in Jack's Successor States of Rega campaign. I am the Forge Daddy. You're welcome. And I've been, from AIM, like the message boards, like from back in those times, I've been, doing RPGs, but didn't get into like D&D until 2003, 2004. So about, 19, 20 years. But
Which
yeah, no, I
actually
mean,
is that actually is a useful and different perspective coming into the tabletop space through a different angle than D&D. Gives you a different view on how these things are put together.
yeah, yeah, living that 3-5 life, baby. What's good?
My gosh.
But yeah, no, I'm excited to have this conversation today.
AIM, those AOL chats, the
The
message
Wild West.
boards. My
It was the
gosh,
Wild,
it
Wild
was
West,
the
baby.
Wild West. Woo!
ASL.
Last but
Yo.
certainly by no means least, we
AOL.
have LegalKimchi. Alex.
Hello, I'm LegalKimchi, also Alex. I do video essays on YouTube, primarily about TTRPG topics, but basically about whatever tickles my fancy. I've done bioessentialism in gaming, mixed race and how it's handled inside of gaming, and in non-gaming related topics, I just released a video, which is an overview on critical race theory, coming from an empirical, political, and legal background, which is my educational background in empirical political science, and I'm a lawyer as well, so legal aspect. You can find me at LegalKimchi on all the social medias. I was also the sensitivity consultant for An Elf and an Orc Have a Little Baby, the entire series of that.
Nice.
So check those out. Those are awesome. What else? I think that's about it. I'm so excited to be here with and having this conversation with these amazing, creative, and intelligent people, and also Stefan. So ready to get going.
Oh yeah, right. Hey, look, the beef's already established, gang. Like, we're already here.
Oh,
As we said earlier, before we got on camera, it's important to have opposing views, and we have that built in.
It's baked in, man.
So to kick this whole thing off, I myself am I've been running for 41 years and I make a lot of stuff, and I've been working very hard with cultural consultants from various groups to make sure that my creations are culturally sensitive while still having some culture to them. And we'll get into why that's important with Stefan in a little while. But to kick things off, the thing I want to bring up right at the beginning is, as a mixed race person myself, Scots, Irish, Cherokee, Choctaw, Seminole, I have seen a huge amount of mostly unintentional, but sometimes very intentional coding of various fantasy ancestries, races, species, whatever you want to call them, as a specific culture or group of people, either based on their culture or their skin tone. Sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's done poorly. But one of the things we're definitely going to approach today is whether or not you can handle entire groups of people being evil, whether inherently or not, in a way that is nuanced and is not horrifically offensive and basically brain dead. The answer is yes, but maybe not quite how you think.
I was just going to say, Jack, I think you're completely off base that people are drawing these things from real world things. I've never heard a Scottish elf or I mean, a Scottish dwarf or a French elf or, you know,
Absolutely not.
Who would
people
do
drawing
that?
from real
What?
world things. What are you talking about?
The Scottish dwarf thing boggles my mind because dwarves, if you're going back to their sources, should probably be German or Norse.
Yeah, Scandinavian, some Norse culture.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So they
Yeah.
should sound like Minowegians.
Yeah, dwarves
Right.
are an interesting mixture, I feel like, a lot of the time, because so much of them comes from like the Tolkien base, which
Right.
is based in Jewish stereotype, but then their whole aesthetic is way more North.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very interesting mixture, and we will be referencing Tolkien a number of times during this discussion, because a lot of this starts with him, whether it was his intent or not, which I don't think it was. It starts with him, and his creations caused us to have some of these problems. Let's be frank.
Yup.
All right, so I'm going to throw this out. We're going to start by asking Alex, LegalKimchi, to give us a little bit of an intro on a topic, as he said he's already covered in one of his own videos, bioessentialism, and how that is a problem for the evil race conversation. You're muted.
So, Biocentralism is a tricky issue because with regards to the term itself, and I apologize, I have a legal background. I care about definitions. We argue semantics. That's my entire job. So you have to understand what the term biocentralism is talking about and what it's not talking about, because I've heard some wild stuff with regards to what is or is not biocentralism. Biocentralism talks about the essence of people, something inherent to them, specifically with regards to like morality or personalities or predilections, things of that nature. It's not talking about having arms or wings or beak or the ability to see in the dark. Those are biology. It's a different issue. If you want to have an argument about that, you can, but that's not the argument that I'm having. Biocentralism talks about something that is part of the essence of the group. So the classic example of this is the orcs being inherently evil trope, right? That it's not that they have tusks, it's not they have sallow skin or whatever. It's the fact that, or the statement, the idea that orcs are evil by their nature. Their biology incorporates a morality, and that it is a part of their essence. That's where the issue is. And that's something that is a dangerous concept throughout history, and something we should be aware of. And also, I think it's lazy writing. That's a side issue, though.
Absolutely. To touch on the bioessentialism thing with the version of the topic that I warned you I was going to bring up, and you already have a counterpoint to it, so this should be interesting. Part of the issue is, if you have evil beings out there in the universe, why, for instance, is it okay for us to all go, well, yeah, mind flayers, illithids, are inherently evil, demons are inherently evil? That is actually generally okay, at least from a certain perspective, although it may not be entirely accurate. But the idea that a real biological race, a biological species, because race isn't real, a biological species or group of people is inherently evil when they have a biological foundation and they exist in the world and have an actual culture, as opposed to being a random monster or demon.
Well, number one, as we alluded to in the pre-show, I don't think either of them are good ideas. Number one, the idea that a race, culture, people are inherently evil through their biology is something that had been weaponized throughout human history against certain communities. Okay. I was once having discussion with an individual with regards to orcs specifically and their relation to Asiatic peoples, specifically the Mongols. You know, Tolkien is famous for his quote where he talks about how they are much like the Mongols. And I was talking to somebody about it, and he offered, well, you know, in the pre-Nazi era, if you wanted to talk about the great evil murdering horde, you would talk about the Mongols. And I'm like, as an Asian person, that is very shallow comfort. Like, I don't know to tell you there. That doesn't make it okay to make them inherently evil because they look like me. So there's that issue. It's something that has been weaponized and has been used against, especially in the West, marginalized people throughout history. So the second point that you brought up is no one really cares about illithids or mind flayers or demons being inherently evil and things like that. And it's true that there are more people who are accepting of that type of thing than, you know, orcs and dwarves and elves and all that sort of stuff. However, I would counter that is also an issue. And the reason why I say that is because anything, when you talk about the inherency of the evil, splits into two arguments why I think it's not a good idea. Number one, I don't think it relates back to the actual history or mythology of demons, for instance. I use that as an example. People love saying demons or devils, you know, are inherently evil. That's an easy one. And I was like, well, let's think about that through the lens of even Christian mythology. These were just angels who fought against God. Okay. These were not a different creature than that. So, you know, you're talking about, the fallen angel trope and all that sort of stuff. So even there, it's not that they're inherently evil, it's that they choose to do evil, and that's what makes them different from angels.
Right.
I'd like to jump on that real quick if I can.
Go ahead.
And one thing that I think is exceptionally interesting about that particular narrative too is there are a ton of religions that follow the same basic line of like how that happens with the creation of the demons, where the angels that fell rebelled against God because they were upset that they weren't being given the ability to do things or feel things or be individuals. And it's something that I think you'll see as a running theme in a lot of those religions, or at least offshoots of those religions, where it does demonize that idea of asking questions, having desires, wanting a personage that isn't just what is expected and demanded of that faith or by God.
If I could throw in a little bit too, just because Professor Brain, a couple of, I think, really important distinctions that Alex makes is the first one that he makes here is that, one, this whole idea, a lot of people really confuse bioessentialism, and they're like, well, what do you mean that Genasi can't breathe water, right? We're not talking about biological traits that, a race that lives in the forest has natural camouflage or something like that, right? We're talking about actual like mental traits, like he said, right? And a lot of people conflate that, right? And think that we're talking about removing everything that makes races like physically distinct from when we talk about bioessentialism. And that's absolutely not the case. And then the other thing that's important that I think he brings up is making that distinction about when you talked about the person mentioning, well, in the pre-World War II era, no one's born a Nazi.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So there's a huge distinction here, right? To say that everyone using the Mongols as like this evil group in the pre-World War II era, right? And then it shifts after World War II to obviously the Nazis, because as I've said many times before, if every one of the best writers in the world sat down in a room for a year, they couldn't come up with better villains than the Nazis. They did it. The Nazis did it to themselves, right? The black uniforms, the skulls, like you'd be hard pressed to make better villains than those guys, right? But yeah, no one is born into like that sort of like ideology, right? And I think those are important, really, distinctions to make, that a lot of people, when these conversations are being had, they conflate these things.
And I think it's really important, just real quick, I'm sorry, Jack. I think it's also really important to point out here that there is this inherent distinction based on, unfortunately, the presentation of these things. Because for, like, the Mongols, it was the entire people. Those people are the savages. But when we look at the Nazis, it wasn't prevalently the Germans, it was specifically the Nazis. It was that group within the people, within the culture. It wasn't all of them, which is where you see it in a lot of other cases.
And that's the same thing I was going to touch on, is when we say the Mongols, first of all, Europe has generational trauma about this because of the amount of damage that was done. A lot of the world does, to be honest. But it's not the Mongols as a people that did it. It's specifically the Mongol war machine under Temujin, under Genghis Khan. It is this, again, it is a specific group from a specific time that did these things. It is Genghis Khan and the things he taught his subordinates and his descendants that did the atrocities and burnt down huge swaths of the entire world and killed anyone who resisted in often very horrendous ways. It was not the Mongols as a people, and that is a distinction that people find very hard to make.
Yes.
That's something I've noticed in particular when looking at groups. This is something I've noticed when I've had to combat particularly racist theories that people use to quote unquote justify the colonization and the genocide of indigenous peoples, is that, oh, you guys fought each other. You were warlike. You deserved that. We were bringing order into this all. And yet you could technically apply the same to the Nazis. You were fighting each other. You were killing each other. We were right to colonize you, even though in this case, we were right to stop the Nazis because Nazis are awful. But it's in looking at ethnic groups, we other because it's almost as if white folks look at this and they do not want to see that they have a capacity for evil as well. It's easier to just paint a group.
And it's fascinating to watch
What
that specific concept change over time, because the concept of whiteness is a rather modern concept throughout human history. And predating this concept of whiteness, you would see that with like intercultural conflict with like the English and the French, or things of that nature. They would just say blanket terrible statements about the other. But when we started to see the homogenization and the creation of this sort of, what would you call it? Color-based coalition of whiteness.
I mean, yes.
That's what we're calling this panel now. We're the color-based coalition.
There we go.
Exactly. Then you start seeing the distinctions. Then you start saying, no, that's just the Nazis. No, that's just the KKK. Or we're going to single out these groups. We're not going to say it's not all blank, blank, blank. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting how that nuance weighted.
Yeah, I want to get into that from two perspectives. As a person of Scots and Irish descent, the English spent a lot of time demonizing the Scots and the Irish, both pre and post their colonization of those places. Wales too, but I'm not Welsh, so I can't really speak to that. And that really is the thing, is that almost all of the human interactions across history spent time othering whatever opponent they had. The opponent became evil in perspective, because you have to, if you see the person you're killing as a person,
It's
it
harder
hurts
to fight them.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a standard human reaction. But then you have what happened with the creation, basically, of whiteness as a concept, which isn't truly completely color-based. It actually, it is shown to everyone as color-based because it was created by a tiny percentage of people who were supremely rich, and they didn't want this thing to happen, which was Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was a coalition, a color-based coalition, if you will, of white, before they had the term, really, Irish, Scottish, Native American, and Black people who rose up in rebellion against the local landowners and slave owners. Now, the reason wasn't good. It's because Bacon wanted to go kill another group of Native Americans for no particular reason. But the point is, it was a coalition of rebellion, and the people in power at the time went, oh no, we have to fix this, and started giving special rights to people they then classified as white in order to keep them from solidarity. Yes.
Oh no, I'm just fixing my camera because it was fuzzy. I apologize.
Over the finger, it's important. But
We're all so polite. It's just like, I'm fixing my camera. Wait, speak.
But
What do you want to say?
A lot of the modern concept of race in the United States is a carefully constructed fiction.
Yep.
That was constructed for the purpose of quote unquote white supremacy, but it's not even white supremacy, because it's rich white supremacy. It's a very specific subset.
Well, then we
They
get
just conned a lot of white people into believing they were helping them, and they don't.
Right, because unfortunately we get into that really, really traditional classic concept of the broke millionaire, right? And that's something that has existed all throughout time and has always played a role into this racism and the segregation and hatred of othering, because if I support them now, they will support me when I get to their level, and I do that by showing that allegiance, which just continued to breed that othering.
I think it's really important to note too, and this is something that I know Q wants to touch on at some point, to put out there this concept of this very long-standing thing, and we have to make a distinction between racism and colorism, and that there's this very long-standing idea and concept between these two sort of concepts. And there's a lot of debate going on, at least in academic circles currently. There's this kind of old conventional wisdom, if you will, within academia, that modern, quote unquote, modern racism, and modern for those of us who are historians, is from about the mid 1600s on. that modern racism required kind of the post-Enlightenment ideas of science and species and things like that, and then this concept of race that we came up with in order to bring about what we call modern racism. Now, there are several historians who are challenging that idea as an idea that was formed by predominantly white 19th and 20th century historians, and who are going back further and looking at these concepts. But we certainly have evidence, if you want to look at the Bible, if you want to look at ancient Rome, of colorism going much, much further back. And I will point people to a really noted article by a scholar by the name of David Goldenberg called Racism, Color Symbolism, and Color Prejudice. And he talks about this core idea of colorism and this core ideal of this colorism being linked to these very ancient concepts of darkness, filth, all of these things being linked to blackness, darkness, those sort of things, right? And evil, and then purity and good being linked to white. And that's embedded globally around the world, not just in Western culture, but in cultures all over the world. This ideal is embedded in there. And so that's something that I think we need to make a clear distinction on, because that touches on things that go into races like the Drow and also orcs and so many other quote unquote dark-skinned evil races and the way those things are coded.
Yeah. Hugh, that brings me specifically what I wanted to talk to you about, and he brought it up quite well. Drow and orcs and similar things as Black or African descent coded people, and the color implications of it and how they are or aren't. And I think that's, by the way, just so you know, Abby, this will probably lead us into your topic, because it does have a lot to do with the cultural aspects of orcs and how they're portrayed and why that thing. So
so at least to me, Drow and orcs, as far as the correlation to being Black coded, is definitely the colorism aspect of it, more than the cultural. Well, orcs definitely, if you've got the tribal, the unga bunga, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. Like if you've got those, then they're definitely more like African / Black coded. But
yeah, a keen difference from aho and how.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
that hurt me.
It hurt me too. Don't worry, Jack.
It is. I don't. The Drow is very specifically like they are purple or blue black. They are like the darker than normal dark skin tone, which sort of plays into the black is good, black is bad, white is good, because on the other end you have the high and the gray elves, which are super pale, blonde, very beautiful,
Very
lovely,
Eurocentric features.
very
Yeah.
Eurocentric, whereas you have the Drow in the Underdark. Like they don't even get to see the sun. You know what I mean?
Right. What's interesting about that is when you go back to one of my main focuses, as people probably know from Of Gods and Gamemasters, is the mythology of things. And of course, one of the sources for the Drow is the concept of the Svartalfar, Black elves, which could also possibly refer to dwarves. And dwarves show up in Germanic. Interestingly enough, dwarves, the only description that my friend Jürgen Hubert has been able to find of dwarves and their skin color is in German myth is in fact black. Just that whole Rings of Power controversy thing. It's kind of interesting that the only mythological reference we have to their skin color is black. Anyway, but there's not a clear distinction between elves and dwarves for the Svartalfar there. The dwarves may be the Svartalfar, they may be elves. But the point is, they're black-skinned creatures that live underground. But they're not. One of the interesting things about that is they're not coded as evil in the original mythology.
Right.
So that is an additional layering on, possibly partially. And Alex may want to respond to this, possibly as part of the extension of the Christian hegemony, demonizing all pre-Christian supernatural creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And then the association with the underworld, with the devil, etc.
Right. So
it's fascinating because, like, when I made my video on bioessentialism, a lot of the things were comments were things like, if you think that the orcs are black coded, then that's ridiculous. And what was fascinating to me is, obviously I'm coming from a position where orcs are being Mongol coded because of their origination. However, the fascinating thing about orcs and the fantasy milieu that you or universe that you see them in is that the coding is based on the author and not necessarily the lore. So you'll have people like Tolkien who will racially code the orcs as Mongol, but then you'll have other people who have maybe unexamined anti-blackness who are projecting that into the orcs. And so they suddenly become black coded, and people are like, oh, that's not in the literature. That's not in the history of it. And I was like, yeah, you're looking at the wrong source. Historically, you could state, okay, Mongol coded, all that sort of stuff. Where's this black coding coming from? The black coding is coming from the author.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's funny because the orcs, and this is a problem that you will see in any fantasy work that has inherently evil creatures or races like that, is that it's not even that, oh, it's going to be anti-Asian or, oh, it's going to be anti-black. It's going to be a reflection of the author's inherent bigotry.
Mm-hmm. And especially their unexamined biases.
Exactly.
They don't realize they have them.
So
yes.
It's almost like a circumstance where all of these different people will say, well, orcs are coded like my group. And to the unobservant individual who's only glossing surface level issues, they're like, this is a ridiculous statement. Why would they make that? Well, that's because you're not looking into why the statement is being made, because we all have sensors and antennas for our backgrounds. Like, I'm not going to catch anti-blackness as well as Stefan or Q are going to catch it. Okay, my receptors aren't up for it. I will catch anti-Asian rhetoric. I will catch anti-Latino rhetoric. I will be able to catch a bunch of stuff because my receptors are up for it. I know that. That's my wheelhouse. I can catch those things. So when a black person comes upon fantasy media and states that orcs are black coded, your first response maybe shouldn't be, well, you should look at the literature on that one because it actually says that it should be. Your first response should be, what tingled that? What caused that reaction? Because we need to investigate that, figure that out, so that we can be more aware of the issue.
Yeah, what part of it is that code? What part of it is causing that problem? And how can we fix it? It's one of the things I got very specifically with Lion on for my goblins in Rega.
Yeah.
Because of the traditional anti-Semitism of the goblin trope, which we'll get into in just a minute. But I wanted to make sure Q had gotten, because I believe he was still in the middle of
but it's fine. That gone. It's in the way. However, I do think an important point, and one that's good to sort of think about when you're looking for those biases when it comes to like orcs and drow. Look at how the world reacts to their half-race children.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think too, to add to Q's point about the drow really quickly, historian me is going to always go back to the primary sources. And in this case, I'm drawing directly from the Fiend Folio entry on drow, the original Fiend Folio entry on drow. And it describes them as black-skinned and paled hair, says that they are cruel and selfish, and that they were driven underground by their lighter-skinned cousins of better disposition. They and this is a direct quote from the Fiend Folio. Drow are said to be as dark as surface-dwelling elves, are bright and as evil as the latter are good.
That is physically painful.
Throw a few grand wizards in there, and it's going to become something else entirely.
One of the things I think is a positive thing is if you look at the way the Descent of the Drow is handled by Ed Greenwood's writing in the Forgotten Realms, it's all very clearly the fault of the Gold Elves. They're the ones who did the wrong thing that caused the Drow to go underground.
Of course.
One thing I do want to bring up, I'm going to circle back a little bit before we get too far away from it, is something Alex said, where it's this, you have the sensors out, you have the feelers out, and the question should be what set that off. And I think it's so important that we take a minute to talk about that, because it is something that, as someone who's, and we all are really very active on like Twitter and social media, especially in the TTRPG space, and it's so frustrating how rarely that question is the go-to where it should be. It's this ongoing like screaming match of please just listen, and it doesn't come up as often, or it doesn't go that way. I can say words. It doesn't go that way as often as it should, where there's a lot of that problem where people go, well, but I know this, but I've read that, but I've heard this, but I've seen that, and it's like, right, but I'm telling you that this is a problem, and instead of going, well, what makes you feel there's a problem, or where is this problem? It's just all of this rhetoric I already know. Clearly, I know more than what you feel and understand and can recognize about your culture and your people and all of that. It's infuriating, but if you take nothing else away from our conversation or our panel today, please take that one away. Take away when someone comes to you and says this, listen to them, hear them, internalize it, and use that opportunity to learn more about why.
Yeah. I think it's important to note too that we're talking about orcs, obviously, and we brought up Tolkien, right? And Tolkien is going to be kind of central to a lot of conversation when you're talking about orcs. And the way his orcs are coded. And so you can go online right now, look all across online, and the typical defense of Tolkien is, but Tolkien wasn't a racist. Look at the things he said about racism, right? Look at the things he said about how racism was a silly thing, right? And so I think it's important here also to note that, one, someone can still say things openly about racism and say racism is not a good thing, racism is an evil, right? And still have inherent biases, and they can still do problematic things without intent because they don't have those receptors up, like Alex said, right? And they don't see that what they're doing is problematic, right? And I think that's part of the case of what's going on with Tolkien's orcs to some degree, right? There's a great, if any of you follow Axel Folio on Twitter, she's a great scholar. She's a Tolkien scholar. She does some really good work. And one of the things she points out is that if you do a careful reading of Tolkien and you read his descriptions of Samwise Gamgee, he's using a lot of the same language that he uses when he was doing his study of Nubians. And so she makes the argument that there's a pretty good case that Samwise Gamgee was black because he uses this word sun-kissed, right? He uses these other terms to describe Samwise that he used when he did his study of Nubians. And so there are some things that, like, a person, any person, be it Tolkien, be it anyone, right, can be multiple things at the same time, right? And write some things that are problematic, write some things that are probably pretty progressive, do some things and say some things that are problematic, and also do some things and say it's progressive, right? And a lot of people rush to defend Tolkien because he's such a giant in the space, to try and wash away any fault that he has by pointing to certain individual things and not realizing that multiple of these things can be true at the same time.
We contain multitudes.
You can do racist things without being a racist.
Well, yeah, it's
one thing.
Yeah, Tolkien.
There's also.
Oh, go ahead. I just want to talk more about Tolkien before we move on.
I am too.
Yeah.
One, yes. There are indications that all of the hobbits, other than the Tooks and Brandybucks, are dark skinned because they're from a race of people called the fallow hides. You don't, which means pale skinned. You don't make an entire group of people called the pale skinned if all of you are pale skinned.
Yeah.
Right.
1, 2, all of the hobbits are described as brown because all of them are mixed, and Sam is more brown.
Yes. Yes.
1,
Yes.
2, when he describes the Haradrim falling, and they very specifically talk about the Haradrim, and Sam is the one, and I think he's mostly Tolkien's point of view character, honestly. Sam sees the dead Haradrim and wonders how he got there. He doesn't think he's an evil man. He thinks, what lies was he told? How was he misled into this? Right? But on the same note, Tolkien even admits, regarding the dwarves, for instance, he admitted straight out that he had screwed up and gotten anti-Semitic with the dwarves in The Hobbit, and that's why he wrote Gimli as such a hero.
So I want to jump on this real quick because yes, but the first time that Tolkien talks about the dwarves and the clear connectors to Judaism and the Jewish stereotypes, it isn't to acknowledge that he made a mistake. That doesn't come until later, because the first interview he has where he talks about that, he goes, well, it's fairly obvious that I have the quote here actually, where he goes, the origin of the dwarves is quite obvious. Couldn't you say that they remind you of the Jews? And he explains this to the person he's reporting to because he's proud of having found what he felt at the time was that connecting line without hitting the stereotypes. It was later that he realized the mistake he made. And it becomes even more obvious when you look at the Silmarillion and you see the Jewish Christian supersession, because the dwarves are also not made by in the same way that the other races are made in Middle Earth. The way that they're created is purposefully put separate. They are created to be inferior. They feel inferior. They're presented as inferior to the elves and the humans who are designed beyond them. And it's this perfect example of, here are these inherent biases. Yeah, the guy was super outspoken about the Nazis. Yup, he hated eugenics and the concept of essentialism, but it didn't change the fact that these were still problems that he had that were so deep that he didn't realize they were problematic until later, which is why, like, Thorin is this just gold frenzied, almost crazy person, the way he's described in Acts in The Hobbit. I mean, is. And then, I'm trying to be a little nice, but there's no need for that. That's fair. That's my personal experience of the culture coming up. But yeah, then you get Gimli, who was supposed to be this character who clearly was a representative and not an outsider, who was a hero and who was that sort of like shining star that I don't want to use the term reset, but shifted the focus. But it didn't completely remove that problematic issue. No, because again, he had a lot of inherent biases.
Yeah, and it was. I'm not going to get into the product of his time nonsense, but people can be both good and bad at the same time. That's one of the big things we're talking about right now. Is how they can't really all be bad.
I think something you touched on too, Jack, real quick. It's important for us, I think, to define when we use the word racist, because I think part of the problem today is that a lot of people become automatically defensive around the word racist because what they hear, whether or not that's what's being said, what a lot of people react like they're hearing is that when you say when we say someone's a racist, that what we're saying is you're a Nazi, you're a KKK member that wants to exterminate everyone of a particular race, right? And racism is so much deeper and more insidious that certainly, yes, there are those people by all means, but racism is a far more insidious beast. And a lot of times, a lot of the racism that we're talking about, not just systemic racism, is also these ideas of implicit racism and these biases that people don't even realize they have. They're saying and they're doing things because, to go back to Alex, their receptors aren't up because they don't live that experience. They're saying and doing things that they don't perceive as racist. They say, well, what did I do wrong? Right. And so I think it's really, really important to just kind of put that out there, and think about when that term is used, both how it's being applied, but also how people are taking that term, because a lot of people automatically get defensive and like, of course the standard, but I have black friends, or whatever, insert group here, right? Because to them, what they're hearing is, well, you must hate all people of other races, right? And that's only a part of
that's the
equation.
Yeah, that's the extreme end of that bell curve.
That's actually Misfit brought it up in chat really well. In America, the racism is so prevalent here that it's impossible not to be exposed to it and to become encultured by it to a way. And so there's a lot of baggage to unpack there, but even trying to tread into that space can both make the racists who use it as a cover push that narrative more, and the people who are at least to a point victims of that reality be so defensive that they go, I'm not a bad person, and it shuts the conversation down.
The other thing to keep in mind is you're looking at least two poles, or not poles, axes of racism, because you do have the colorism angle, right? The matter of the skin color and the person's origins, but you also have this what I like to think of as this extreme Eurocentric cultural normativity, right? So that it's culturalism as much as it is racism. I think we've all seen that a person of a non-European ancestry who speaks well or has good manners, i.e., has conformed to the Eurocentric normative behavior patterns, is treated more as a member of the dominant culture, as a member of the dominant society,
Assimilated.
An assimilated person, rather than someone who is steeped in their own culture, their own origins, even if those origins are, for instance, the urban culture of South Central Los Angeles and Compton, which is a very valid culture if people take the moment to observe its origins and how it came about. Great poetry comes out of it. People call that rap. But it is phenomenal poetry if you know what you're reading or listening to. And it's that cultural divide that makes it so hard. It's one of the big problems, because we talk about being a melting pot in America, but we're not. We're a mishmash of a lot of different cultures, and the dominant culture doesn't like that.
I call this a striation pot.
Oh, I love that.
I've heard it referred to as tossed salad, with white supremacy being the dressing that's smothered over everything.
That's fair.
It's also real valid. Yep.
And disgusting because of the images and too many multiple meanings of phrases.
Yeah, in school, I was taught cultural mosaic, and I see white supremacy as the landlord special, just being painted right there.
Yeah, that works.
One thing about the antenna, so to speak, being able to see sort of stuff is, and I know everybody here has probably experienced this in their lifetime, is the concept of, well, my friend is, or I am blank, and I think it's okay. Here's the thing we need to understand about that. None of us are perfect representations of our backgrounds, okay? Because of the inherent racist nature of so much of our history, I don't think it's shocking to state that a lot of Black America have anti-Black sentiment within themselves. A lot of Asian Americans have anti-Asian sentiment within themselves. A lot of Hispanics have anti-Hispanic sentiment within themselves. Like, there was a timeline, like in my own upbringing, where Latino self-hatred was like ingrained in how I grew up. I grew up much more siding with my Asian background because of anti-Latino familial sentiment. Okay, so there's that as well, and understanding that sometimes the way that we utilize tropes, we utilize language, can change over time. And I use this as an example. I talk a lot about being of mixed race, mixed heritage, being Puerto Rican and Korean, and the conversation of being mixed. I have the full understanding that at some point there may be a different term. Like I am anticipating the day that a new generation comes about and somebody comes up to me who's mixed race and goes, mixed? What am I, a bag of nuts? How dare you use that term? And I'll be the old person in the back of the room going, that's just what we called ourselves back then. Okay.
Yeah.
So like sometimes it changes over time. Sometimes there's a lot of self-evaluation that needs to happen. And that's something that, you know, in my own personal work as a sensitivity consultant, I will bring up things in a sensitivity reading that I personally am fine with. But because I've researched the topic, I understand may not be acceptable throughout the entirety of the group. Okay, because that's two different things.
Yes.
That's a note about sensitivity consulting. If you're going to do that sort of stuff, you have to recognize that it's not just you that you're reviewing it for.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Because
it's not
no
just your
ethnic
own
group-
personal biases.
No ethnic group or culture or nation or any of those things is a monolith.
Yes.
We all bring our own individual experiences and biases to the table, just like everyone else does.
Yes.
I have a kind of a bizarre experience in terms of that. I have some knee-jerk reactions to Native American issues, both positive and negative. When I was in North Dakota, I got into fights because I was called an Indian, despite the fact that I'm very proud to be a Native American. North Dakota is also the only place I've ever lived where I've gotten beaten up for being white one day and beaten up for being Native American the next. So that was fun.
Yeah, I have
Sounds
But,
like North Dakota.
Shout out.
yeah, people talk about there not being a lot of racism in the North. No, you're incorrect.
Oh no, absolutely not.
Different
Yeah.
foci sometimes.
Oh no,
Yeah,
listen,
no.
it's a completely different beast up north. Also, because this was going to what Alex brought up earlier, the inherent like self-hatred for your own people. That shit gets baked in. Because let me tell
Feel
you,
it.
I was a part of a scholastic program in my school. It was the Scope program. So I went to all black school because I'm originally from East Cleveland, Ohio, which is the black Cleveland. Don't even worry about it. And so they had like a program that you could be a part of where you, if you're one of the smart ones, you're one of the good ones. You were in a class with one teacher the whole year. And like this went from second grade all the way up to sixth grade. So we had our little class and then one teacher per year. And so we were othered
Yeah,
in
you
our
get
own
divided.
school.
You get
Right.
divided and sequestered
Yeah.
and othered
Mhm.
from your entire age group, regardless of their skin tone or ethnicity.
Correct.
You are now
Yeah.
a new other group.
Correct.
Yep, we have the gifted program. That's what I was
Yeah.
in.
Yep,
And you know,
Scope
I
was
went
the
from being
gifted.
bossy and loud to, wow, you're so well spoken, Abigail. You're so
Yeah.
quiet and nice. And I'm like, oh gosh, I better keep being like that then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mine was the Boy Scouts. I was just gonna say mine was the Boy Scouts. Like, regardless of the fact that there are many Boy Scout troops that are all black or all Hispanic or multi-ethnic or whatever the case may be, I'm here to tell you right now, the Boy Scouts of America is one of the whitest organizations in the country
You're not
as a
wrong.
whole.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You're
like
not
completely side tangent. My partner is telling me about like how he was in the Boy Scouts, and then he would like go to like the handbooks. We found a handbook while we were looking through an antique store. Whole other thing there, but you just look and be like, "Oh, we were called the Navajos," and I'm just there like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yep.
You sure were.
You
Yeah.
sure were."
Sure were, bud.
We're gonna go ahead and take a break.
I have just a
Get up.
quick story I'd like to bring up just 2 minutes before we go to break. if that's
Sure,
okay.
but I did want to warn people that when
Yes.
we come back, we're going to start with Abby getting to talk about one of her favorite tropes for evil races and evil cultures in cultures and races in general in TTRPGs. But yeah, go ahead, Lion.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, since we were talking about the othering and the Boy Scouts and all the fun stuff, I am in this really unfortunate position where being a Euro-based Jew, people look at me and go, "Ah, you're just another white guy." So end up on a lot of the unfortunate parts of those conversations where people think they're just talking to another white guy. Which yes, everything that has come up in the last couple of minutes, but all of this reminded me of I went to Boy Scouts exactly once when I was a kid because my father was like, you should do it. It'll be good for you. It'll be a good way to socialize. I went to the Boy Scouts and our scout leader had completely unhidden, untouched, unchanged a swastika tattoo on his forearm. Because in the 90s, there were still a lot of places where they didn't particularly care, unfortunately. So I went once, and boy, did I never go back. And I remember how, at that age, I was already kind of like, of course, this isn't a fucking problem here.
Right.
And it's something where you see it so often, and if again, I go back to kind of the censors, right? If you're not, that one is a pretty blatant example, but there's so many where if you're not looking for it, you just won't see it,
Right.
and you won't realize it. Well, you were put in the special class. That's a good thing. Why is this a problem? Well, they're helping you understand good manners and good engagement. Why is that a bad thing? Completely ignoring all of the problematic history behind it.
You don't see it until after the fact. Like that hindsight is 2020 in this whole, you know.
Yeah, that comes down to cultural genocide and kill the Indian to save the man.
Yeah.
Same basic concept. I will, as an aside, just before we leave, talk about how angry the Nazi appropriation of the swastika is because of its original Hindu symbolism.
Yep.
And just also neo-Nazis and their appropriation of my beloved runes.
And it's almost like Europeans have this weird thing for taking stuff and ruining it. It's weird.
You hated half the world for spices and didn't use any of them.
We're not here. We're not actually here to other anyone in that regard. Keep in mind.
Fair. My apologies.
Every group that has come to great amounts of power in a region has done very similar things.
If I can put my Korean hat on for a second. Go on a lecture about the Japanese.
The Chinese
so
have done
valid.
it. The Chinese have done it to many of the cultures they absorbed. China didn't start out big guys. Japan has done it to the cultures they tried to absorb, but failed mostly, and then were kicked back to their island. But anyway, every culture that has become an expansion, an imperial culture, of which there have been many, has done things so much like it. It's not just Europeans. It's Europeans now because Europeans are the ones who have the world power, as it were, especially in our section of the world.
All right. But so we were gonna go on break. While we're away, go do your bio things. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. And after
you would like to address them.
Right. After, Abby does, her thing, then we can get into your questions.
Well, we also have another specific thing that Stefan wanted to talk about before we get into questions, but that's just two more basic topics.
We will get to your questions.
Yes. Okay.
But first, we're gonna go take a 10-minute break, right? We're gonna take like a 10-minute break.
Good.
So take some time, think it up, go use the bathroom, all that stuff. We'll see in a bit.
Basically, go piss, girl.
That.
Thank you.
we're good.
All right. Welcome back to Of Gods and Game Masters, the Evil Races panel. We've talked about a lot of cool stuff, but the next thing we're going to talk about is near and dear to Abby's heart, by which I mean she probably hates it. Just guessing. And I'm not even going to give an intro on what it is. Abby, you go ahead and talk about that little niggling splinter in your mind.
Absolutely. And I'm going to start with a definition, which is in Western anthropology, philosophy, and literature, the noble savage is a stock character who is uncorrupted by civilization, and as such symbolizes the innate goodness and moral superiority of a primitive people living in harmony with nature. And that's directly from Wikipedia. So I'm going to be talking about the noble savage trope. And you might say at first, well, Abby, it's positive. Noble right there. And I think as someone like Alex might understand, there are instances of the model minority, things like that. And the noble savage is different in the way that it is objectification of indigenous people. We become one with the landscape, the animalification, and with things like Twilight, where the indigenous people are literally werewolves. It goes deep, but particularly we're going to be talking about its influence in games, because recently, last year and this year, a lot of good stuff has come out for indigenous people and creativity. People like Quanah Chasing Horse, and of course, Coyote and Crow, which is a game I've absolutely fallen in love with. But we're going to be talking.
I want to play it. I want to run it.
Yeah.
I backed it. I have the. I love it.
I highly
It
recommend.
looks absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
stunning. Oh, sorry, my necklace came loose, but I'm going to keep talking. Yeah, so you might think, Abby, what's wrong with the trope that is inherently positive? It's you're living in harmony with nature. You are connected to the earth. We're going to be talking about why that necessarily isn't a good thing. And we're going to be starting out with a letter from none other than Christopher Columbus. This was a letter to the Spanish treasure at the time, after he had discovered the Dino people. They'd brought us parrots and balls of cotton and spears and many other things. They do not bear arms and do not know of them, for I showed them a sword, and they took it by the edge and cut themselves out of ignorance. They came to us with kindness. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. And that's why the noble savage is so negative. That's the history behind it. It's not just being in connection with the earth and James Cameron's bullshit of connecting to the spirit tree with your neural cue. There is subjugation. There's yes, I will fight James.
Representation that is all done by white people.
Exactly. Blue red face. It's yeah.
Ooh, buddy.
I will go in. I will fight James Cameron another day, but hey, if you want my address, James, turn on your location. Come catch these ads.
Let's go.
Yes.
But the issue in gaming is
just
a particular
as a quick heads up.
Oh,
I'm so sorry. Just a quick heads up. We are in an ad break right now. If you want to hold off for just, I don't know why it popped up, but it did. So if we want to just give it like
Jeff is trying to defend his friend right now.
I was setting up the ads. I had the ad set up so it was only supposed to go when I started, and then 60 minutes in, like during my break, and I don't know what happened.
Did you manually run any ads during the break?
I did not.
Okay, that might be something to keep in mind for next time.
Okay. Yeah, it is.
Thank you guys for warning me.
Oh, I know
Yeah,
what
not
part
a
of the
problem.
problem was. We didn't do the starting soon screen 20 minutes before.
Oh, yeah. That'll do it.
And my first ad break is 17 minutes in, so that it ends right as
So-
we're supposed to start.
Everything is off.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That did
That'll
it.
do it. Okay. So, Abby, you were saying so
Yeah, as I was-
wonderful.
Are we still in the ad break?
No, we're
yet?
still in
we're
the
still
ad
in ad
break.
break.
Yeah, hang
You're
on.
still on
dang
that
it.
break. Yeah.
So-
Don't worry, I'll let
Get
y'all
into
know
it.
when
I'll
we're
be
coming
going
back
nuts.
to it. Yeah, I'm so
I'm
sorry.
looking
Yeah.
at auto insurance right now. This
Oh.
is gonna,
Same.
this
Fucking
is gonna
blow.
be
Get out of
hilarious
here.
for anybody
I just have
watching
the
like
I
the,
just
re-
have the,
the VOD.
chat bubble up, so I don't see none of that shit.
We got, I think, 30 seconds to go, and then
I'm
we
seeing
should be good.
Disney and I'm just feeling rich.
Although, Abby, that reminded me of my friend Sonia, who's an artist in the D&D world, who stated in one of the live streams, "My hands are rated E for everyone."
Yes.
I love
I
that.
hope you speak sign language, because all you're going to see are these hands.
Yeah. My favorite is I got a 2-for-1 special on these hands.
Yeah.
We will not run out of hands.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There you go.
15 seconds, by the way.
Thank you.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah. Look,
I'm just
listen,
watching a frighteningly European boy driving a car.
that
I have
noble
some
savage
weird
shit. That noble
robot
savage shit is
Godzilla
rough. Mm.
All right,
I think we're back.
Yeah.
we're back.
Okay.
Yeah, we're back. Jeffrey, I know what you're doing. Come fight me too. You can bring your friends.
There
But
you
as I was
go.
saying, as in video games, TTRPGs in particular, how this comes through is that we will have a forest-based people who are simple, away from society, who often take from actual indigenous groups. For instance, as a Dene person, a lot of our culture is based around sheep, Dibe, and the Dalish, the Dragon Age, who the developers have a really weird obsession with murdering a lot. They herd animals and use them for their wool. It's very interesting. But in games, the noble savage trope comes through when we see groups who are, again, separated by nature, uncorrupted by society, almost infantile. Parts of the land as they are, as much with buffalo, eagles, and wolves. It is deeply dehumanizing. And that is something we need to talk about when we're talking about evil races, because it may not come off as evil inherently, but then you get things like tribes of kobolds and tribes of goblins. And then you got the 2-for-1 discrimination special where we have anti-Semitism and anti-Indigenous behavior. And of course, letting players just freely kill them. I wonder when that happened.
Yeah.
How?
No.
Even the... Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So the interesting thing about that is it does tie directly into the evil races thing, because you have these two opposing sets of tropes that are applied to indigenous people. Or to,
If we're not a noble savage, we are, as the U.S. Constitution says, merciless Indian savages whose known role is warfare, is undistinguishable threat, destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. You are either the noble savage or you are the merciless savage.
See, and
Either
this
way,
is why-
you are less.
And
This-
that, I'm sorry, real quick, if I may. And one thing I really, really love pointing out about the way that line breaks down is you said it's infantile. And it is inherently infantile, right? It's this idea of either, well, they're nice and sweet and removed and they don't know any better, or they are thoughtless, murderous animals. And in either of these instances, it's infantile. It is this concept that they cannot... These people somehow, for some reason, just haven't developed the ability to have complex thought or to maintain complex concepts because it's othered, and the fact that it just doesn't work the way you think it does or that you want it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even then, there were many towns and lands and cities in Turtle Island in South America that were destroyed. And now we are reduced to, all of us either as teepee dwelling, peace pipe smoking, peaceful people of the land who are gentle and understanding, or either that we're brazen raging drunks.
right, and that is applied not just to indigenous peoples of America, but to all hunter-gatherer societies, all non-civilized. And I mean that in the specific sense of we don't live in cities, not as any sort of judgment. Cultures that have chosen not to settle in cities are painted with that brush of one or the other extremes in general by whatever civilized culture they are dealing with. The same thing happens with the Ainu in Japan. The same thing happens with various tribes folk across Africa with civilized African people today, etc.
In gaming, it's almost like it's the player's responsibility, and the player may not necessarily be white, but they are given the role of savior, the bringer of civilization, manifest destiny. You know, that bitch, that art that everyone's history teacher showed them, to come in and help them with their problems. And it is even just like a quest, like bring me apples. It's like, please, this is very sacred to my culture. I need your help. And it's like, well, you could just do it like this.
Right. Or
the infantilization.
Right. Yep. Or they're used simply as a tool.
Exactly.
Yes.
Background.
Well,
the
I
air,
think
the environment.
The people tied to nature.
I think through all of that. Oh, I was go ahead, Q.
Okay. The people tied to nature, you know, you have the heroes come in and they learn from these people so that they can go and be the big heroes rather than like actually appreciating and learning. Like they're just a tool, and like we get that with, you know, like the
we
wise
need you to
black
save
man
us from
trope.
these colonies. Exactly. Wise black man and mystical native trope.
Yep.
There's
it's that same energy. Yeah.
It leads us back to the orcs again, because the orcs are almost always, one of the ways they are black coded and indigenous coded and et cetera, Mongol coded, because the Mongols were a culture that was nomadic, did not in general live in cities until they took over all of the biggest cities on the planet at the same time. But anyway,
I think that,
but yeah,
you know,
all of the evil groups are set up in this way that says, okay, you're these nomadic or semi-nomadic indigenous peoples of wherever, because the fundamental conflict in D&D before it became codified as good and evil was law versus chaos, and the people not living in cities were forces of chaos.
Yeah, I think you don't have to look any further than to look at this concept, and certainly, like Jack says, this is a global concept. We see this all over the world, but probably one of the greatest voices that kind of encapsulates all of these things is Rudyard Kipling's White Man's Burden, right? Where he literally says, take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, go send your sons to exile to serve your captive needs, to wait in heavy hardness on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil, half child. Take up the white man's burden in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride, by open and simple speech 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. He says it right there in this kind of like, ode to imperialism, to U.S. imperialism, specifically in the Philippines. But he says that idea, half devil, half child, that these people need to be managed, right? Because they're either, like Abby said, they're either the vicious savage, the devil, or their children, right? And so we have to manage them, because if not, they're going to be in one of these two categories, and we need to take care of that. That is our role, a white man's burden, right? That has to be taken over, because if we don't, they're just going to be running around. They're going to be living in mud huts or in teepees or in whatever sort of indigenous quote unquote housing, right? That, if we don't show them the proper way, right? And like Columbus says, he hands them a sword. Well, and he takes this idea that, well, if they don't know what a sword is, they have no idea what arms are, right? They're a bunch of dummies, right? You don't know what a sword is? Come on. And so I think it presents this this very problematic element that no matter how you try and paint it as this wonderful kind of back to nature, we're going to sit around the fire and commune with nature and get back to it all. No matter how nicely you try and present it, it is just rife with problems.
Exactly. It's either the commodification of culture, but all the ways it's a justification for colonization and continued cultural genocide.
Yes.
The commodification of culture is a horrific thing that we can get into in another panel sometime, because it is something that the dominant culture in the Americas is so very, very good at, is taking all the coolest, best stuff from all the cultures that make up our melting pot and selling it to people, possibly the people who originally created it. Anyway.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But yes, while we were gone, Kodama, we were in fact making references to the Na'vi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
when I saw Way of Water, I was just going through, yep, there's that. Yep.
Because as Abby said, it's blue version of red face. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And throw in some blackface too. I see those hairstyles. I see you, white guy with dreads.
Oh gosh, yes,
Uh-huh.
yes, not wrong, not wrong at all.
It's almost as if it's like, well, they can't say that it's indigenous coding if we sprinkle some black in it,
Yeah, exactly.
They take the Maori as well. They're just like,
are they aware that every continent has indigenous peoples?
I don't think they are.
Yeah.
No.
I don't think that's
it's like that meme
That's
from Brother
not
Bear of all
true.
things. Like, quit telling people I'm dead.
Right.
I sadly actually really enjoyed Brother Bear. Anyway,
Same.
I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem that because James Cameron's Avatar, right? Is so many problems, right? But we also have a lot of great both sci-fi and fantasy elements where people were able to take fictional peoples like alien species and things like that, and use those to tell stories about the real world in times where it would have been far more controversial to just come out and say, we're going to tell this story about black people and white people.
Yeah.
But you use an alien, right? But then also the flip side of that is that
Star Trek
then it
was big
also
on that.
Star Trek was big on that. And then also it gets, but the problem is that then you also end up with examples like Avatar, where it's like, oh, Jesus, Cameron, what did you do?
Clearly a white guy going into the savage native man and teaching them.
Right.
He becomes fucking chief of their tribe. It's
Right.
ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, it's white
So
savior
yeah.
trope.
Yeah,
all
dances
over it.
with blue cat people.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah,
Dances
absolutely.
with Smurfs.
Dances with Smurfs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, like going back to TTRPGs, like you have this stuff, like these positive representations of the noble savage, and then it gets really sinister because then you'll have these kobolds with headdresses and very indigenous coded, and it's just like they're vicious, they're monsters.
Yep.
Kill them.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
and there's that justification of genocide. And I know that's a big, scary word, but when we're going look into the history, that's what it leads back to.
To tell people why this is such a problem. So I on the weekends, on most Saturdays, I help my niece out. She runs games. She organizes games for kids at our local game store. And so I help her out running games for kids who are typically between the ages of about 7 up to about 14 are the kids that are in these games. And we average on a Saturday, we probably average between the different GMs that run probably about 20 kids or so, give or take. And it becomes problematic when you have these representations then that are then tied back to real world groups, right? When you have kids who are and through my games I try and kind of redirect them because what happens is when we talk about the presence of quote unquote inherently evil races, we talk about them being coded, be it Asian, be it coded black, be it coded indigenous or whatever. And then what happens time and time again when I'm running these games for many kids, they see an orc. What's the first thing they do? They attack. Boom. Kill it.
Yep.
It's an orc. Kill it. It's a goblin. It's a kobold. Whatever.
Yep.
It's got to die, right? And that becomes so problematic when you are putting those things in there and then taking into account this real world coding that's being laced in there. And people will often say, so many times they will say, well, but it's fantasy, it's fiction, it doesn't have an impact on the real world.
Yeah.
Wrong. There are countless, even if we set aside metaphor and allegory and all of these other elements of storytelling, right? There are countless studies that you can find if you want to go digging, or if you want to DM me, I will give you some stuff to read. Countless studies that show the impact that fiction has on real world thought. And that ranges from the gamut, from the way people think that our justice system operates, the way police procedures operate because of what they see, the way
propaganda
function in the real world, right? Propaganda, yeah, absolutely. The way things function in the real world. I will go out on a limb. I try to avoid blanket statements, but I will go out on a limb and I will make this blanket statement. I will say that every person watching right now, every person on this panel, including myself, thinks something incorrect about the way the world functions because of something they've seen in media.
100%.
There are multiple things that we've seen in media, and you don't even realize it until you realize it. And I'll give you a quick example. For instance, there are people who are sitting in jail right now because they've either been convicted or they've made confessions that they started a fire by tossing a cigarette into a puddle of gasoline. Ladies and gentlemen, the ATF conducted 2,000 experiments under different conditions. You cannot get gasoline to ignite with a lit cigarette.
Nope.
Doesn't happen.
Doesn't work.
But there are people who are in jail right now who confessed under coercion that they tossed a cigarette into a puddle of gasoline and started a fire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
That's
There are
because
so
under
many-
coercion, you'll tell them whatever they want to hear.
Whatever they want to
Yeah.
hear, right?
Yeah.
But and then people believe this myth that we see on television all the time.
Yep.
So the judge says, "Oh yeah, that's how that works. Guilty. Send the guy to jail," right? And there are multiple other things, countless other things.
Mm-hmm.
And so to bring that back around to what we're talking about, these things that you think are just fantasy and just fiction can have a real world impact without you even realizing it. And so it's so critical to have conversations like this and talk about why these things and coding all these things together can be so problematic.
Absolutely. Like, it's one of those things where I wish somebody did like a 51-minute video essay about how representation in the media affects how we view these sort of things.
I think somebody
Anyway,
did.
did that happen? I don't know.
Yeah, there's this little known YouTuber you may have heard of called
Just tell me more. Tell me
Uh,
more.
I wish
I don't
somebody
think
had
I've
done
ever heard of
it.
that.
But no, it's absolutely fascinating. Being an attorney, and it's and everybody has that thing, right? There's something, everybody has been affected by media, but everybody also probably has a lived experience or professional experience where a certain type of media annoys the crap out of you because you know that it's so wrong. Like, I have a problem watching like legal shows and movies because I was like, that's not how trial works.
Right.
emergency medicine shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and stuff like that. There's one controversy on Netflix because they had these two teenagers who were like, let's go oppression Olympics, and I was like, that's not how we talk.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And so yeah, it's out there. Be aware of it.
We're going to want to transition into a topic that Stefan definitely wanted to bring to the table. As we're doing that, I want to draw attention to how important the topic he is bringing up is, with a simple statement. You cannot invent a culture whole cloth. You will create it based on things that you have ingested from the world around you. Okay. Anything you think you came up with is a distillation of everything else you've been exposed to. So you have got to try to recognize your sources, credit them, and treat them respectfully. And that leads us into ways to positively portray other cultures.
Yeah.
And why you should try, even if it's not your culture. Stefan.
Yeah. So yeah, this is something that really the first thing that I really want to talk in. It's very easy. We talk a lot. The people who are in this group and several others talk a lot about on Twitter about the use of cultural consultants and things like that to circumvent these things. But obviously, something like that is not a reality for somebody who's running a home game, right? You're running a game at home, and you're just doing this game for your regular group of friends or whatever. It's not going to be feasible for you to go and hire a bunch of cultural consultants for your home game, right? But you still want to try and present other cultures, right, in a good light and not, fall into these problematic tropes that we've been talking about. And how do you do that, right? And so the first thing I'm going to say is the same thing I tell to my students all the time: use your resources, right? There are people who you can ask around you, right? And don't just say, well, my Black friend said it was okay, right? Because going back to like points that were made earlier, right, by both Alex and Jack, not every culture is a monolith, right? And just because your friend says it's okay does not mean that people from that group as a general rule are going to think that that is okay, right? So what you want to do is try and put things out there and say, hey, ask multiple people, hey, look, I'm just doing this for my home game. Would you be willing to take a look at this for me and give me some feedback, right? And let me know, am I going wrong? Where am I going wrong? And most important thing here. Listen, our natural instinct when somebody says, hey, look, man, this right here, this is problematic and why. Our natural instinct as human beings is to get defensive, right? Particularly when it's something that we wrote, something that we came up with, something that we're proud of, right? We're like, well, wait, that's not how I meant it, right? So going back to what I said earlier about Tolkien, here we're not talking about a case of what you intended, right? Right. We're talking about the intent impact equation, right? There's what you intended, and then that's how people on the other end, the receiving end, are impacted, right? And so you need to take that into account. Don't take it personally and say, oh, okay, well, can you tell me more? What, like someone said, what triggered that? Where is that coming from? Can I know some more? So how do I fix this, right? How do I change this, right? And sometimes you can still make these changes to what needs to be done without completely altering, the essence of what it was you were trying to get at, right? The other instinct we have is to mount a defense, right? Well, what I was trying to do here was this, right? Avoid that, right? Again, the natural instinct is to defend ourselves, and to try to put that out there, what we were trying to do. Listen before, right? Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And think about how it impacts other people, right? Look at stuff, resources on the internet, and don't just pull from one source, right? Pull from multiple sources, right? Get a breadth of what you're trying to do, because even if you are, as Jack pointed out, you think, oh man, I'm coming up with this whole new thing, right? You are going to, even if you don't realize it, you're going to be, even if you are going to be able to draw into all of these things, something, some new aspect or some new twist or something like that, right? As human beings, we draw from what we know. And sometimes we do it without even consciously thinking about it, right? And so we're going to tap into things that we are aware of. So maybe we're going to take a little bit element of a government system we're familiar with. Maybe we're going to take a particular element of a particular cultural tradition or artifact, and we may not even realize that we're doing that, right? And this is why it's so important to get a diverse range of people to look at your stuff, right? And certainly, super important to note, that may be something that you may not be able to do for your home game, right? Like, you're going to be like spending your time preparing for your game. You're not necessarily going to have time to send this to a bunch of different people to look at. But this is where it becomes super important when you're creating things to look at different sources online and to realize and accept the fact that you might be wrong. You might find out later down the road that, oh man, I wrote that 3, 4, 5, whatever years ago. Man, I've done it, right? In my own setting, right? Where I've looked back at it and go, can't believe I wrote that shit.
Yep.
and look back at it and go, okay, I've got to fix this. I've got to change this, right? And be open to that ideal of change and being able to grow, right? Because I say it all the time on Twitter, progress, not perfection, right? The ideal here is to try and move things forward and not necessarily be stuck.
So, Alex, you definitely seemed to have strong opinions waiting to be spoken.
Yes, indeed. So I wanted to bring this up because this was a question in chat during the break that people wanted me to bring up. And I think it ties into this, and it ties into the creation of your own cultures and groups inside of a game. And that is the question of cultural essentialism. Cultural essentialism is kind of a sister study of bioessentialism, which sort of gets a pass sometimes. And I think it's something that'll ring untrue if you try to incorporate it into your game. And I use an example of let's talk about model minority myths, and that, like, Asians are good at math. Okay. There is nothing with regards to our biology or culture that makes Asians good at math. at all. And these Asians, you look at studies of Asians in the United States, and it's like, oh, they get better grades, they do very well economically. It must be like a cultural thing from Asia. We have poor people in Asia. We have uneducated people in Asia, tons of them. They don't leave the country. It's not as easy for them to come over here. So what you're getting are individuals that are coming over on like student visas or being brought over by corporations because they want to, use their brains as a commodity. But you're not getting everybody. And so it creates this skewed view of a culture that is untrue to the reality of a culture. Asians aren't good at math because we have a cultural thing that makes us good at math. The Asians you see are good at math because their parents were mathematicians and brought over by companies. That's it.
Yep.
This idea that there's, the elves are good with bows. Why? Like, why would they more or less it's such a weird thing. It's the Klingons. You could state that, the Klingons, that's their culture is warlike. It's not that they're inherently aggressive, but they're raised in this warlike culture. And I was like, who cleans the toilets on the starship? Okay. Who's
Yeah.
Who's there is a Klingon at a stop and go somewhere distributing candy bars as spaceships get refueled. Like it's not something where it's, because it's a certain culture, they don't have this sort of thing, or this culture is really good at that thing. No, ingenuity, invention has come from various cultures at various times. And a lot of the things that we say it was invented by this person or that person or this culture or that culture was independently invented by another culture around the same time. I make the joke about that, but the enlisted, that's the enlisted clean the toilets in the spaceship.
I should add too, who has the widest gap in the United States between the wealthiest and the poorest in their demographic? Asians.
Yep.
The widest gap.
Something
and the Klingon reference made me want to cover this. First, just like you only see the Asians who had mathematician parents or grandparents and came over, so they're good at math. The Klingons we see are all their warrior caste officers.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So of course they're warlike.
Right.
That's their job.
Yep.
Similarly,
way more that than it is the whole culture.
Yeah.
Yes. And their culture has an extremely warlike warrior caste, much as the Mongols did. Unsurprising, based on much as the Klingons we see are basically samurai or knights or whatever. They are the warrior caste, the warrior class.
Yeah.
The Klingons are very key to this conversation we're having, as we discussed off camera, because we've talked mainly about fantasy races like orcs and drow. Klingons are, 1, space orcs. 2, based on the just like the orcs, coded as both Mongols and black people separately. And as I joked in the original series, coded as Puerto Ricans, because they are referred to, in fact, jokingly and racistly, as Puerto Ricans in gold lame.
Yes. One thing that I want to bring up also that is kind of the other side of this coin, a conversation that was pretty popular a couple of months back, where it was the conversation about Jews running Hollywood. And it's really fascinating when you sit down and you look at the history, because you know what, there is a reality that there is a lot of Jewish people and companies in Hollywood, and if you go back and you look at the history, it's not because they were manipulative and they found their way in and they knew it was a way to take control. The reality is that when the Jews first came over to America, and we're looking at like post World War II, we're looking at a lot of situations where they're being treated like shit and they can't get jobs and they can't get hired anywhere. And at the time, movie work was considered garbage work. That was the thing that no one wanted to do. And so the Jews who had come over and had settled here went, okay, cool. This is something that I guess we will have to do because we have to make money somehow. And surprisingly, when no one else wants to do a job and you have a group of people who can't get hired anywhere else, that's how it works out. And I think it's important to see this other side of the coin to it, where Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say one key element, I think, that all of this encapsulates all of this, for everything that we're talking about here. One thing that I really hope people take away from this is that there is a fear, whether we're talking about elements of Jewish culture, whether we're talking about elements of indigenous cultures, Black culture, whatever the case may be, there's a fear that people have, and in some ways it's justified. We all see what happens on the internet, that if you get it wrong, you're going to get stomped. And so what happens is people take this fear and they're like, I'm just not gonna have that in my game. And then of course, then what happens is we have these overly homogenized games because people are like, well, I can't touch that, right? I'm not indigenous, I'm not Black, so I'm just going to exclude those characters from my narrative. And that is as problematic, if not more problematic in many ways, than making them and in an earnest attempt getting them incorrect, right? And so I think it's important to note that we need to continue to have conversations so that people can understand that, and also I think some people certainly there are a lot of people that are just bad actors, right, and bad faith that need to be chastised. But I think some on the other side can learn to have a little bit of graciousness and say, hey, they made an honest attempt, they screwed it up, but can we show them how to do it better next time rather than jumping all over them? Because I think then it creates this problem where, again, there were so many people. Coyote and Crow is a perfect example. Connor Alexander responded multiple times who were saying, well, this game's not for me, I'm not indigenous, right? And he was like, no, we made this game for everybody to play, right?
So we're coming up real close on the end, and I absolutely agree with everything you're saying. We need to spread out the cultural influences on our games, on our settings, to make them more diverse and more interesting, and get as many voices as we can in there, even our individual ones, even if we happen to be just white or just Asian or just whatever. Grab from everything we can, because TTRPGs, whether fantasy or otherwise, are overwhelmingly not even just Eurocentric, but an argument I'm willing to make is that they're strongly Anglo-centric. Even the majority of the experience of Europe is tossed out. You're seeing more Scandinavian these days, but for the longest time, it was just all blend medieval England.
Yeah.
And I for a future, I want to set up a panel specifically on that, on Eurocentrism and Anglocentrism. And I hope you guys are interested in that as well. But
we got to bring the color-based coalition back.
Yeah, let's go.
Again.
We need to get shirts or rings or something.
Both.
Are we going to get color-based coalition?
Yes.
On big fists. Just
I'm in favor. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left, so I want to specifically open this up for questions from our wonderful chat, our wonderful audience. They have been very engaged.
I think Q is already jumping on what I was going to bring up, because there was a really good one in the chat.
All right.
Okay, I got you. All right, so TG Kodama asked, would there ever be a time where illithids are considered evil given their nature as aberrations and how they literally parasite races to propagate? Now, let's talk about why illithids are evil.
This is good because I've delved deeply into illithids. So
at least this is me personally. I view illithids as being evil because, and a lot of vampires as well, they are some of the monsters that take away control. They take away consent and willpower. They are like the ones that literally go, you're mine now. And that is why they're
more so even than the brain eating or the blood drinking. It's the mind control that makes them heinous.
Correct. Now, is it possible for an illithid to be good? Yes. Certain circumstances. One, if the hive mind, the hive brain mother, whatever she's called, the elder brain. There you go.
Yeah,
we got there. If the elder brain has somehow worked its way into a different way of thinking or life or what have you, that could work, because then that mindset goes through the rest of the hive,
Colony.
the
Send
rest of
the
the
mother
colony.
brain to the sensitivity training.
Yeah.
Right,
Right.
exactly. You know,
They-
sometimes they have a change of heart.
And the thing is, for that to work, not only do they have to give up their mind control ways, they have to find a way to ethically source brains, because you have an inherent problem there
Right.
where even if they are not actually evil, they still have to eat specifically sapient brains.
Yes.
Mhm.
And they're going to be seen as evil by those sapients.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, which is unavoidable. And that's
True.
something that I think is important. Is we've talked a lot about objective and subjective evil, right, and what that means in the perception. And illithids are a really good example, and that's why I'm really glad that it came up in chat, because their necessary function in order to continue to live is one that is inherently dangerous to other people.
Correct. You could absolutely have them be the monster hunting monsters. Like this particular colony goes after the ones that are tyrannical and are like warmongering, and so they just come out, they go blah, 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 and then they go back down.
I think
They've propagated without, being evil per se. It's, again, that's all a matter of perspective. The other way that you could have an illithid be good is if they have broken from the hive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. And they still have the problem of ethically sourcing brains.
Sure.
I think too we have this thing too, in that lore, not only illithids, right, but lore changes over time, right? So there's this distinct possibility. We go back to the vampire, right, as the example here. I'm sure we've all seen something that we can think of off the top of our heads where we've had vampires who are drinking cow blood. We've had vampires who are getting their sustenance in other ways than having to drain and or kill human beings or other such without consent, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the beautiful things about TTRPGs. There is the official lore, right? But none of us have to adhere to that, right? So we could
change the rules.
We could certainly have an illithid, right? Who and then also, even if we stick to official lore, right? We're talking about a world full of magic that does all kinds of things, right? So can we have an illithid mutation? Can we have an illithid where one of them or a group of them went through some sort of magical ritual where they no longer need to take brains without consent, that sort of thing, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There are
Like,
so many options there.
A powerful illithid wizard gets the wish spell and goes,
right.
I would like to not have to eat brains anymore.
I think the illithid example is an interesting look at how morality and what is good and evil are constructed, because we're talking about this and it's like, oh, illithids are this and that, but the lines that we draw of what is ethical sort of thing, or what is moral, good or evil, are made by us with our own biases. Like you were just drawing the lines of like, they need to eat sentient brains. That's not ethical, or that's immoral. It's like, why is that more or less immoral than a non-sentient brain? Why is ending the life of a sentient creature more or less immoral than a non-sentient creature? Because we're sentient creatures, so we drew that line because it includes us in that line.
Yes.
Illithids would have an entire biological system that would have a different line, because they need to eat to survive. Why is it more or less ethical to eat a plant as opposed to an animal? Exactly. It's because we draw that particular line.
Yes.
It's the mobility of ethics and the mobility of morality that is something that needs to be examined here. So when you're talking about something being inherently evil or inherently good or inherently anything, you have to analyze it from the lens of your own perspective. And so much most people would not consider it immoral to eat a carrot or step on an ant, to an illithid, why would it be immoral to eat a sentient human being?
Agreed.
To Alex's point, I was just going to say, to Alex's point, I was in a game in the 90s where there was an illithid who was the head executioner of a kingdom. and as far as everyone was concerned, right, these people were sentenced to death.
This
There
is
you go.
totally legit.
Right?
Yeah.
Off with the
Totally
brain.
legit, right?
No, that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Yeah, and to bring it, sorry, Jack. I'll let you go first.
Mine's gonna be really quick because
Yeah.
I'm just completely agreeing, because even at the beginning I said they will always be perceived as evil because they are inimical
Mhm.
to us,
Right.
right? But if you were to take an indigenous approach, an indigenous American approach, or at least for the, I can only really speak for the Southeast tribes
Yep.
that I'm from. When one treats your prey, you treat your food with respect, because they are all worthy of respect. You do not see them as less than you. It is not different to kill a human than to kill an animal or to eat a plant. But you treat it all with respect and only eat what you need, only kill what you need. Then that morality changes again.
Yep.
You can have the illithid who's like, well, I only kill what I need, and I don't take pregnant women, etc. Just like we don't kill female deer who's pregnant or who has fawns, etc. This ethical approach to hunting and predating. But go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, but in actually one of the long-term D&D campaigns that I'm in that we're streaming, Luck and Chaos, we're exploring this with the race of Ahulings. They're a homebrew race they're from the Underdark. They literally come from demons. They're giant vampire bats. And with that, I wanted to explore, how much of this evilness isn't biologically inherent, but rather can come from societal pressures. And of course, my own experiences as a cult
Yes.
survivor. With that case, Viscorth, my character, she grew up where, these aren't people. They aren't the same as us. A lot like kind of how Jack and Alex were talking about. We see you as lesser, or maybe we see you as this kind of equal, but we're going to treat you as this because this is how we've been raised. And of course, cult structures. And Fist realizing, oh, well, morality is different out here, and I want to be, someone who is not murdering and eating people and keeping them prisoner. She realizes there are ways to ethically gain blood, and of course that feeds into that morality. Her lens of morality changes as she discusses with the party and learns. It's this moment of, oh, these aren't just primates that we're eating. These are people.
Right. So we are running right up against our time limit, which is really unfortunate. And yeah, we definitely have to get the color-based coalition back together because we have a lot of cool topics we can talk about, and this
Yes.
is a great
Yo.
group to do it.
Next time we'll have
But-
shirts. Just keep a lookout for
Yes.
it.
There you go.
Yes.
You-
I'm
How
down.
are we gonna? You are putting a lot of pressure on us to get shirts, but I'm still with it. All right.
I'm here for it.
So what we're gonna get right now is closing thoughts and outros from everybody. The last thing you want to leave people with on this topic, and again, anything you want them to remember about you and where to find you. So I am going to do it in, once again, I was going to do it in a random order, but I'm going to go alphabetically this time by your screen names, because those are the ones I remember the best. So we will start this time with LegalKimchi. Who would be
Oh.
first, even if we use his real name, because it's Alex.
No, Abby's right. No,
Abby
Abby,
would be
technically.
first.
Oh my God, Abby. I'm so
Yeah.
A names, two of them. It's crazy.
So I am LegalKimchi. I do video essays online. You can check it out at LegalKimchi or youtube.com/LegalKimchi, including stuff like representation in gaming, being mixed race in gaming, bioessentialism in gaming, and other topics like politics, international relations, and most recently, critical race theory. My thoughts with regards to evil races in your games and things like that is think about what makes something evil. Is it something inherent, or is it an action? Why is it evil? And from whose perspective is it evil? You may think that this is overthinking it, but I am telling you right now, not only is it a fun exploration for your head, but it will breed interesting stories for your game. And if there's nothing else that convinces you, thinking about these sort of things will make your players have to think more and role play more because they can't default to the easy answer.
Absolutely. All right. Abby, who should have been first, but I still think of her by screen name, which is Nuffofabby.
That's all right. Abby gets double the outro time, obviously. That's how we make up for it.
Sure. Go ahead, Abby.
Yate, I'm Abby. As I said earlier, I'm Danae of the Near the Water tribe. Not tribe, clan. da things. Look at words. But if you want to catch me on the Bird and Bee website at nuffofabby, where I am doing actual plays. I am doing cultural consultation. Particularly, I would recommend checking out season 1 of the All Night Society. I am playing a very Dinnick character. There is so much love and care given. We're currently doing transcripts. Check it out. It is absolutely fantastic, and the people behind that series is amazing. And as well as I mentioned earlier, Luck and Chaos. It is a completely homebrew campaign that supports third-party creators, and you'd be helping support a lot of amazing people through that, as well as a majority Biome PC cast.
Nice. All right. Q would have been right after LegalKimchi because of the Midnight Ink saying an M comes before N, but I don't care anymore. Q.
Lion Night. But there's Lion Night, though. But there's
That's
Lion
right.
Night.
Go.
But
All
it's
right,
the
cool.
Lion Night.
Oh, ale gross. Anyway, hi, I'm Q. You can find me at midnight_ink. That's INQ. Q is my name. I'm sure you get it. I am all over the place. You can find me here. We should be back with the Successor States of Rega very soon.
But that's not
we
here.
can-
That's over on Tales from the Table
That is
Studios.
Tales from the Table, sure. Tales from the Table Studios.
It's
exactly.
just because I'm running tech. It's confusing. It's fine. You can give them the date if you want. We've announced it.
Oh, bet. Cool. Yeah. June 8th. Yeah. We're going to be back June 8th for Successor Taste of Rega. Come see Cole Igniades, the Forge Daddy. You're welcome. I am also doing a lot on Live from the Apocalypse. I've got 2 coming up this week. I've got Redacted on Thursday. It is a Powered by the Apocalypse based system that the DMJD made whole cloth. I'm having a good time playing an absolute monster. He's great. And then on Friday, we're playing the Regency based Monster Hearts game called A Season of Secrets and Shadows. I'm playing Dorian Black. He is having a time, just having a whole last time. It's been great.
You had me at Regency and Monsters, man.
So good.
It's been so good. We've been absolutely spicy. Also, because we're talking about color and whatnot. I keep forgetting my fucking podcast. I really need to stop that. I have a podcast with my sisters. It is Code Switching Naturally, where we just talk about a bunch of random topics just from the lens and perspective of us being Black and in America. We hit a couple of real serious topics in the last couple of weeks, so it's been real deep and in depth. Come see me. You can find me on YouTube and also on Spotify for that, or wherever you pod your casts or cast your pods. There you go.
Either or, it's fine.
Yeah.
All right, Stefan.
Yeah, I am Stefan _Knight_X on Twitter. You can find me here this coming Friday. It should be right, Lion. Tales from the Periphery, our Expanse.
That's still
Life on the Periphery. Over at Tales from the Table Studios.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Tales from the Table Studios.
We're partners. It's
Lion's here, so yeah.
I'm here. I'm running tech. It happens
on Lion's channel. This coming Friday and every other Friday, we're playing a great Expanse game over there, along with Logan the DM and Xtel the King. And then you can also find me every Thursday night at 4:00 Central Time, doing a dark Pathfinder 2e game over on Faith Fatale's channel, where I'm running a really fun cleric of the Goddess of Death.
Nice.
And so having a good time with that. So come check that out if you can. And then I'll let something slip. Keep your eyes peeled. I'm working on a little something with that fellow over there, LegalKimchi and Trooper SJP, that we should be announcing here soon. Some top secret stuff. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Wait, we are? What?
I don't know.
He doesn't even know.
That's how secret it is. Yeah.
Surprise.
Yep, surprise. Yeah.
We sat down one time, and now you're committed.
All right, Lion.
Hi, I'm Lion. I'm the creative director and founder for Tales from the Table Studios. I'm also a storyteller and I can't think of words anymore. I am also a storyteller and a cast member on a number of different series.
Yeah.
Player, yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for.
There you
And a
go.
player in a number of different series. Presently, you can catch me Monday nights as the overseer, GM, storyteller, whatever you'd like to call it, for Crumbling Foundation, an SCP-themed actual play over on, I'm so fuzzy, over on Tales from the Table Studios. We have recently been dealing with a number of different Canaanite gods, and it's been quite an interesting experience for our poor players who are not equipped for it at all, and things are about to get even more intense. You can also find
Sounds
me...
like you're having a ball.
You can also... I like cat herders. That's a good one, too. You can also find me on every other Thursday, starting on the 8th of June, on Rega, the series that runs over on Tales from the Table Studios with Jack as our storyteller, where I, much like Q, am a cast member and am all down for chaos. You can also find me on Saturdays for the next couple of weeks over at RPGs Uncovered, where we are playing Locusts, and I am playing the absolute worst human being I've ever possibly played. And I'm so excited because somehow he is also currently the fan favorite. Because he's horrible but adorable, and we love Chad.
He's Chad.
He's
Chad.
Chad.
Such a Chad.
We love Chad. Chad's the best.
Such a Chad.
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at LeLionKnight42 or TFTT Studios, or on social media anywhere else at Tales from the Table Studios. Yeah, big fan. Don't know if you can tell. Absolutely loved being here. Very excited for this. And if you see me freaking out when any of these people were talking about the projects they're working on or who they are, it's just because I'm so hyped for them. They're all amazing, and I love them.
All right. So the final thought I want to leave you with regarding this topic is basically two things. Evil requires choice. If you cannot make a choice to do a thing or not do a thing, then you cannot be held morally responsible for that choice. To a certain extent, without free will, you cannot be evil. Right. So the concept of inherent evil, i.e., evil you can't get away from, is self-contradictory. If you don't have a choice, you don't have moral agency. How can it be evil? It can be bad. It can be inimical, but that's not the same as evil. Also, just keep in mind all the things we said. Everything is going to draw from real world cultures. So find out what culture you're drawing from and be respectful of it rather than just going, well, I made this up, so it's fine. Because
Yeah,
it probably
do your
is.
research, give credit.
Yup. And be honest with yourself.
You can see me here roughly every other Friday to so far. It may end up going every Friday. See me here on Of Gods and Gamemasters every other Friday or every Friday doing Myths and Monsters, where we pick a monster or creature in modern TTRPGs, and we trace its folklore and mythological origins and how it developed into the monster as we know it today. And sometimes we come up with a better version that is more faithful to the original as well.
Wait,
I will have folklore.
Wizards of the Coast doesn't make faithful adaptations of their monsters.
No comment. I will have different folklore experts for each of the monsters that we work with, experts preferably in general from the culture that we're covering. In addition, you can find me here, on Sundays, probably every other Sunday, for a panel or my own world building process. And finally, Successor States of Rega, Thursday evenings, starting back on June 8th, every other week, 8 p.m. EDT. The important thing to remember about it is it's sort of a post-pseudo Roman Empire thing, but it's also entirely a region of POC because I took the logical conclusion of an empire that lasted 3,000 years, covering an entire area equivalent to the Mediterranean, mixing completely so that the Reagan ethnicity is a mixture of every Mediterranean and sub-Saharan African ethnicity and all of them together. So I think it's a really interesting setting, and I've worked very hard to keep the feel of classic fantasy while trying to subvert or destroy some of the negative tropes and negative stereotypes. So, but I thank you all very much, Lion, Stefan, Q, Alex, Abby, thank you all for agreeing to be here, and I cannot wait to set up another panel for us to work on.
Ditto.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, tiny hearts.
I make kidney beans with my heart, so I'll use that. I'm like, here, kidney bean for you all.